Yeah, this is a topic that I talk about with a lot of people because, and it's very interesting, sort of coming off the topic of, Asian hate and racism and whatnot. It is very interesting to see how Asian pop culture has affected not only Canada, but affected the world. And I've tried very hard to dissect what it is exactly about certain ingredients of Asian pop culture that exist in order for it to sort of become acceptable in the Western context. So I first of all want to go back and look at the history of things, because a lot of people in the West feel that the West started everything, that everything, film and music, it all started, pop culture all started here in North America. I mean, Hollywood was established in 1887. There's actually, a lot of people don't know this, but it was a development. It was a real estate development. And that Hollywood sign was actually the real estate sign to advertise the houses that the developer was building. And then it wasn't until later in the early 1900s, about 1911, that they started to build film studios, and they kept this Hollywood real estate sign up, and that's defines the area. But so we're looking at 1911, when Hollywood technically really began. But if you look at China's film industry began in 1896, and Bollywood's film industry, the Bollywood that we know today, began in the early 1930s. So, I mean, if you look at Asian film, for example, as an example of pop culture, that's been around for a very long time. They've just gone on different streams. Now, I first want to look at some of the factors that result in whether pop culture is going to be accepted in another country like Canada, for example. So you've got, I'm oversimplifying this, but there are three main ingredients. One is language, the other is theme, and the other is attire, clothing, style, and things like that. And this has a huge effect on whether pop culture, film, music is going to be accepted in the West. Now, I like to go back first to the 1980s. There was a German music invasion around 1982 to 1985. And it was really interesting how Germany did it. You may recall a musician by the name of Nina, and she came out with a song called 99 Red Balloons. It was a German song. It was about nuclear war. And she was incredibly popular. Now, back in the 80s, you always came out with the song first, the album, and then you came out with the MTV video. So Germany released the video, and while she's dancing on stage, everybody realized that she didn't shave her armpits. And automatically, it was rejected. Kids were like, it just wasn't a thing back then. They were disgusted. Much Music banned the video, and they had to actually reshoot the video. They came out with an English version and reshot the whole thing. So this is really interesting, because when you look at her, she could be any Western artist here in Canada or the States, and that was one of the things. There was a lot of aspects that people could relate to. The tune sounded great. If you took away the German lyrics, it was something that everybody could sing along with. The clothing was contemporary. And I look at that, it always shocked me that one little aspect where the style or whatever people want to call, personal hygiene or whatever, was different than what we have here in North America. And it was completely rejected. So let's take a look, and I'm jumping a little bit all over the place because this is such a huge topic. But we had a phenomenon that, people might remember Psy. He came out with a song called Gangnam Style. And this song became incredibly popular. It was a song about the lifestyle in the Gangnam district of Seoul, where people are supposedly very trendy, they're hip, and they're supposedly of a different class than the rest of the people. Now, Psy's use of music was interesting. If you took away the Korean lyrics, the music was very catchy. It sounded like it could be a Western song. And it was something that young people could relate. The dancing was very modern. The clothing was Western, but this was very interesting. The language, it was clearly Korean. they added a few English phrases into the song. But what happened was when Korean music, not just Psy, but that was sort of the beginning of, you know, the real K-pop invasion, there was an increase in Westerners enrolling in Korean lessons. So that showed me that there was such a strong affiliation with the style, the clothing, the music, that people were willing to overlook a little bit of the fact that they couldn't speak the language. Most music takes off when you can actually sing along with the song. That's why most pop songs, the lyrics are very simplistic, but there's always a refrain that everybody can sing along with, and that's what you remember. And that's usually what you sing along with in the car. And that is something that they were able to overcome with Psy, which was very interesting. Now, K-pop is, you know, this sort of very stylized Asian version of the American boy band. And so when K-pop came in, there were a few elements that many young people in Canada immediately could relate to. So we're looking at the familiar clothing. The language certainly is not, but the music and the style and the dancing is something that is very popular. So they had, you know, like I said, a lot of people around 2018 started to enroll in Korean lessons so they could actually sing along with some of their favorite K-pop songs. And as it turns out, BTS on the left there, they became the largest, most successful boy band in the world, regardless of language. I mean, they just became the most successful. And on the right, that is Blackpink. And their lead singer, Lisa, is one of the most popular girl band celebrities in the world. So now what about Bollywood? A lot of people ask me about Bollywood. So why hasn't Bollywood caught on the same way that many of the Korean features have taken off? So if you look at Bollywood, well, they've been around for a very, very long time. But if I go back to my three themes of language, theme, and attire, this is where Bollywood seems to have not made the same strides in Western culture and not sort of gone sort of mainstream, so to speak. The language, first of all, you know, like the original Bollywood films in Hindi and whatnot, the language is usually embedded in complex music. So it's very difficult for people to follow along. The clothing is also very traditional. It's not clothing, most Bollywood films, I mean, it's changing now, but if you look at a lot of the Bollywood films over the last few decades, the clothing is not something that most Westerners can relate to. And not only that, but Bollywood films, if you've seen one before, every 5 minutes, they break out into song and dance, which is culturally something very different than what we're used to here. And the themes of the films are often along, you know, sort of a long, drawn out romantic themes. And only now are Bollywood films sort of now exploring a lot of other themes that Western films and Asian films have now started to do. Now, many people may remember this film back in 2000. Now, this film, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, you know, it was very prominent at the Oscars. It starred, you know, Chow Yun-fat, who had already made a name in Western films. Zhang Ji in the back there, the woman at the back with the sword, she hadn't really made a name in the West yet, but this was almost seen as an anomaly because right after Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Chinese films were absent from the Oscars for the longest time. So, you know, I'm inclined to think that if China kept introducing films of the sort of kung fu genre, that certainly Asian pop culture wouldn't have taken off as much as it has today. Now, while we were all eating a steady diet of Netflix and Prime and Crave during COVID, this television show, Squid Game, came out, and it was the highest rated television show that Netflix ever had. And a lot of analysts were actually baffled by it because it was completely in Korean. But it's very interesting because if you look at the themes, even though the language wasn't there, and actually Netflix does an amazing job of dubbing into multiple languages now, so you don't have to suffer with the subtitles. But you know, the Korean formula really knows how to internationalize and export their product. it's a dystopian future, which everybody loves dystopian storylines. There's the whole heightened danger, you know, it's a very deadly reality show essentially. And we're all still, you know, hung up on reality shows. This is really something that had changed the complete landscape of how the West sees Asian film, Asian television, and Asian culture. You know, the music was catchy. Yes, it had a lot of violence, and I mean, you can say this about many shows. There are even reports of kids playing in playgrounds and actually reenacting Squid Game. I don't even know how they would have seen it. I mean, unless their parents let them watch it. But a lot of the games, and these games all end in death, by the way. All these games that are played in Squid Game, they're actually kids playing these games in you know, in playgrounds during school break and whatnot, and not the deadly version of it, but they are inheriting those games. So that has had quite an influence certainly on Canadian children. Now, what about China? So China has, I mean, their film industry is massive. They were into, you know, streaming media almost at the same time that Netflix came out. One of their largest streaming platforms, iQIYI, has probably more users than even, you know, Netflix altogether. With Chinese film and television, so something very interesting happened. This picture right here is a poster from Wolf Warrior 2, and this was China's, well, it was one of their first attempts, and it was very successful at portraying sort of the very macho, hyper-masculine military hero from China. They were Chinese special force commandos. They were in Africa doing a special operation, and they were the, you know, they were the heroes of the film. This was very successful. It sort of ran along the same theme as what we saw in the 80s and 90s with the Rambo and Arnold Schwarzenegger and whatnot. And so China seemed to be on course for exporting a lot of this into the West. You know, right here in Canada, we actually have iQIYI in North America, which is in Canada and the US. And they were producing some of the most popular reality shows globally. But what happened was China kind of switched gears. So as I mentioned, this is Youth With You. Youth With You was in season 3. And all of a sudden, there was a crackdown by the Chinese government on reality shows that, not all reality shows, but reality shows that were idol shows where you're choosing potential members of a new boy band or girl band and whatnot. And the reason for it was there seems to be a hyper fandom culture in China, where people are idolizing their celebrities and whatnot, and they're really going over the top. So that picture may not make a lot of sense in the bottom right, but that is a picture that is all over the internet of people opening up little cartons of milk, looking at the cap, and then pouring the milk into the sewer. Millions of gallons of milk were wasted. What happened was there were some reality shows where you would go and you would buy the milk product, you would open the cap, and inside the cap, you could vote for, you know, your favorite idol. So people only wanted the cap. They didn't want the drink, and they poured it out. And, you know, China has very strict food wasting policies. So that didn't fly well at all. So right now, I would say that China, in terms of how programs and pop culture coming from China it's sort of been pulled back a bit in terms of the West. Korea seems to be, you know, on major gains. You know, Parasite, the great film Parasite, won an Oscar, and it was the first foreign film to pick up that particular award. So I, you know, there's no conclusion to this talk. It's an ongoing evolution, and I'm just always amazed to see which Asian culture is going to surprise us next with what they export. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.